We are in the very fortunate position here of having both the Quad HD and the Full HD versions of the latest Dell XPS 13 with infinity screens here. Gloss version on the side, QHD with a touchscreen. Full HD version on the left, no touchscreen, matte. Now there are a lot of differences between the two. What we're going to do is go through some of the detail in this video. There'll be a detailed video about battery life, detailed section about battery life in this, which is a very important factor here, and something that we were surprised to see the amount of difference in battery life between the two devices. We're going to show you a little bit about the screen color and brightness, and that battery life, it really is because of the power usage, and the increased power usage on one of these, you can guess which one, also obviously affects things like heat and turbo boost. So we'll take a look at that as well. Of course, you've got touch on the QHD version and a native QHD resolution. So if you're working with 4K videos, I'm not sure that too many people are going to be working with 4K videos on this device, but if you wanted to work with 4K videos, you have got native 4K screen to work with, so you can, given good eyesight, get the best out of that. There's also the issue of scaling with the QHD screens. Some of the older Windows apps still don't scale correctly. Many of them have been updated now. Many of the more popular ones have been updated to support scaling, but there are a few that catch you out every now and again. We'll also talk about price and the weight involved with the touchscreen as well. So let's start then with color and brightness. We've had both these in the test lab, and we've done camera measurements on the screens, brightness and color accuracy, color spread as well. I'm going to give you some of the results. Now let's take the full HD version first. We have got a full brightness here of 277 in the middle and a maximum of 294. So that's pretty good. It's not amazing in terms of brightness, but let's go to the QHD version here, and we're getting 285 on this at center brightness, or an average, sorry, of 285. So both of these very similar results in terms of brightness. Now there's one thing to note: the QHD screen has a lot more light blocking electronics in it. Tighter pixel density means actually the electronics between the pixels can be less translucent in terms of light throughput than the full HD version. So what we would expect is that the QHD backlight is working harder for the same brightness. And we'll have a look at that in terms of power usage in a minute. But first, let's take a look at the color accuracy, color spectrum of both of these devices. Let's start with black levels then, and if we take a look at the performance scores for our test lab results, 0.18 for the touch version, 0.19 for the non-touch version. So really not a lot of difference between the two devices in terms of black levels, and because we've got a similar full brightness, contrast ratio is much the same as well, and a very good 1500 average for these two devices. So very much similar in terms of brightness and contrast there. Let's have a look at the color accuracy and the color range. Again, it's a very similar story between these two devices. Color accuracies are below 5 for both of these, and grayscale accuracy, well, actually the non-touch version is slightly ahead with 4.26 on the delta. The lower that delta is, the better it is. If you can get to 2, that is one of the best in the class. Obviously 0 would be perfect, but 2 is about best in class at the moment. So below 5 is good. Anything above 5 would be a little bit inaccurate in terms of color, but these two obviously showing values around 5 of a good color accuracy. What about color range? Well, if we look at the Adobe RGB color range that we've measured here, the touch version scores are very good, 59%. That's a good Adobe RGB color range coverage. The non-touch version, a 41.6 color space coverage, color range coverage, which is a lot less than the touch. So there's the first difference that we see between the touch and non-touch in terms of screen color and brightness and accuracy. The touch version here, slightly better. Let's talk about weight. There's a slight difference in weight between the two devices. It's under 100 grams and you really wouldn't be able to notice this. If anyone challenged you which was the touch and which was the non-touch version, you really wouldn't know. There's no thickness difference either, so really in terms of weight and size, there's no difference between the two touch and non-touch versions. Now, I mentioned scaling issues. Well, Windows 10 and Windows 8 introduced new scaling modes, but some of the old apps, some of the very old Windows 32-bit apps, for example, weren't scaling capable. And I've recently had this problem with 3D Mark 06, which still hasn't been fixed. Well, you wouldn't expect 3D Mark 06 to be fixed, considering 3D Mark recent versions work. So there's an example of an older app that we use in our test that doesn't work. Also, Power Director version 12 was always a problem for me. Power Director 14 has now fixed that. So if you've got a specific suite of apps that you use, you want to think about whether those are scaling capable. Really, the only way you can do that is to try it on a QHD display. For most people, though, in terms of just general app usage, QHD is probably a little bit too much. There's one case maybe with native 4K video editing, as I mentioned at the head of this video. You might want to start doing some editing. Certainly 4K video editing would be possible on this. It's the rendering part of the 4K video editing process that might be a little bit slow on this platform. The fast SSD, the 8 gigs of RAM, and the fast SSD and the RAM would give you enough probably capability for a short multi-timeline, 3 or 4 timeline with titles, fades, and a few effects for 4K video editing. But of course, that rendering, you'd probably need a more powerful machine to get a really good rendering speed out of it. So that's the only example of 4K that might be useful to someone on these laptops. As for touch, well, that's a matter of taste really, but I think as we go forward, more and more people are going to be used to touch. As a long-term touch user, I certainly pick up the full HD version, try and touch the screen to do stuff, because I'm so used to those touch interactivities. It can be useful for dragging and dropping, for example. That can speed up some video editing processes, for example, dragging and dropping files for copying. And of course, just general Windows 10 usage. It's nice to have that touch capability there. And certainly some games give you some nice touch features as well. That's up to you though. If you want touch, well, you'll have to go for the QHD version because that's your only option. You will be paying for it. There's a price differential. Let's have a look at the price differentials between these two devices that we've got here. So the prices differ across regions, of course, and in fact it's difficult to get both of these configurations in all regions. The FHD version, for example, in Europe is difficult to get hold of. In the US, that FHD version with Core i5, 128 gigs of storage and an 8 gig RAM option is $1,000, which is $100 more than their entry-level Core i3 version. The QHD Touch version, sorry, let's just swap those over. That's the QHD Touch version here. The QHD Touch version is $1,399. Now obviously you're getting touch, you're getting QHD screen, you're also getting an extra 128 gigs SSD. But that's a lot of money just for that Quad HD screen, which may only be useful to a number of people. Now, when I show you the next bit of the video, which is a very detailed and unfortunately one take, because I had to do it that way, I wanted to show that there were no tricks being played here. What I've done is I've taken these two devices and spent a lot of time analysing the background power drain of the two devices. I've reset them and I've updated drivers, and I've just tried to make sure that they're in exactly the same configuration. There's more details in this section, but you'll see a big difference in battery life between these two devices. Take a look at that section now. Two Dell XPS 13 Skylake versions here, and obviously on the right you can see the glossy touchscreen QHD Plus version. On the left, this is the full HD non-touchscreen matte version. The idea of this video is to show you some big differences in background battery drain for those two screens. The two systems are using the same build, they're fully reset, same drivers, same BIOS, and same number of processors running in the background as far as possible. The touch version does have a couple of extra processors because it has to run things like on-screen keyboard process on top of the normal set of processors. But we're in screen off mode right now, and when I come back out of this in about 5-10 seconds, you'll see the minimum idle drain possible on these platforms. There's very little software running in the background. We're on power saver mode, and as I say, it's a fairly clean system. So let's just bring those out of power saver, and we'll bring the monitors up onto the screen, and we'll quickly go to see here that it was running at a minimum of 783 milliwatts, which is incredibly low. 1.1 watt, so 1100 milliwatts, slightly more on the touch version, and but that is just milliwatts difference. Now what you can see now is that we're on lowest screen brightness. This has jumped up to a 1.8, sorry, it's difficult to read, 1.825 is that? Crikey, my eyes, 1.885 on that side. And then on here, interestingly, we've jumped up to 3.32. So there's a big difference of over 1.5 watts in terms of background usage on this system compared to this system. Now, trust me, I've used this setup over a period of 2 days, maybe 3 or 4 hours. I've been watching and testing these backlight power drains, and although that one's just gone up to 2.5 watts, trust me, the average should be about 2 to 2.2 watts idle low backlight drain on this one, and then on this, and that went into sleep, that will pop up in a minute to around 3.5, which is usually the average. There it goes, the average screen on brightness. Now let's just do one more thing. We'll push the screen brightnesses all the way up, and we'll watch the drain patterns as PerfMon monitors that. PerfMon takes figures from ACPI systems, so reported usage from the battery itself. Now this one has gone to 3.3, and you'll notice that the backlights do fade after a few seconds. We've got adaptive display brightness turned off, but there is something dimming the backlight. I think it's a Dell driver, a Dell system that actually dims the backlight after maybe 10-20 seconds slightly. Look over here, we've got 6 watts here on the backlight usage, full backlight usage here, 3.3 watts. So that is an incredible 2.5 to 2.6 watts difference. That's a really big amount of difference between the two backlights there. It will be touch driver, it will be display driver, it will be brightness, LED brightness power needed as well for that QHD. Obviously a higher density panel, probably needing more backlight power just to bring up the same levels of backlight. Now trust me, we do have very much the same backlight level on both these versions. We've measured them through a proper backlight test, and full results were up on Notebook Check. I'll just bring those up on the screen for you now so that you can see the theoretical, or no, the measured maximums that came from the lab tests at Notebook Check. So there's not much difference in real backlight brightness there. Still running at around 3.3 watts here and 6 watts here. So that's 2.4 watts, 2.4 watts, just over, nearly 2.5 watts difference there. Let's bring those backlights down again, see how long it takes it to settle. The camera obviously readjusting the ambient light here to bring that into brightness, and that will go down now to about 2 watts, and this should go down to 3.5 watts. And I have run this test maybe 20-30 times now, and this is exactly the averages I'm seeing over time. 1.801, 3.367. Now I'm going to let these go into sleep, no, not sleep, screen off mode. An interesting thing happens here. I think there's a difference between a display refresh technology, because I forget what it's called, panel self-refresh, that's it. What should happen when the screens go off, in fact what should happen if there's no activity on the screen, is the panels should detach themselves from the controller and just refresh themselves. Now what I think is happening is when the screen backlight goes off, that the panel on the right hand side goes into a deeper self-refresh state. I'll just bring those back now and you'll hopefully see that. This one went down to 1.2 watts minimum. This one didn't go down to 1.2, it went down to 1.8 watts minimum. But if I take off all screen activity from both panels, what does happen is the panel on the left does seem to go all the way down, and I've seen it down as low as 880 milliwatts, which is slightly lower, and that was the figures we saw just at the start of this video. But it seems that maybe if there's activity on the screen, the panel self-refresh technology doesn't work as well on the non-touch version. That's not really that significant for most people, unless maybe you're doing video rendering and you turn the screen off to save a bit of power and stop the system heating up, which is a sensible thing to do. But really, it won't affect many people at all. It's the important backlight drain figures that are going to affect most people. I mean, in browsing at a medium brightness, maybe 150 nits, you could be talking about 20% more power usage on the QHD touch version than on the non-touch version. Certainly, if you're idling down a lot, this will idle down a lot lower, and we could be talking about 20, 25, 30% more battery life out of the non-touch version in average use cases than in the touch version. I'm just going to put the screens back on. I'm hoping that we can just see that the lowest drain there is, as I said, 866. That's the lowest I've ever seen. 880 was the previous lowest. 866 milliwatts being used there, and that went down to 1026 milliwatts, so also the lowest I've seen on this one as well. It's usually around 1.2, and there it goes, popping up to 3.7, and this to 1.9, and those are the figures I've been seeing over the last 2 days in multiple scenarios of testing with multiple software builds, multiple OS builds. It's worth mentioning actually that the OS itself idles down very nicely regardless of what's going on, and if you put things into power saving mode and battery saver mode, a lot of the background activity stops. You can put your Wi-Fi card into metered mode as well. That also stops some background activity, so all these little tricks can help you to get the most out of the battery. All right, we'll let those go back off again. That is the Dell XPS 13 non-touch Full HD matte version versus the QHD touch glossy version in a backlight battery test. And it's looking like the QHD is taking a lot more battery power than the FHD version. It gives you an idea maybe of why you might want to choose the FHD over the QHD version. Don't forget to check out the full reviews. We've got full reviews of both of these, the QHD version and the Full HD version, at notebookcheck.com, notebookcheck.net for the English versions, and you'll see the scores, tests of everything, including the screen color accuracy, screen color space, and battery life tests, and of course all the other good stuff that we test at Notebook Check. So there's a big difference here. Now, I have tried everything I can to get that battery drain down on the touch version. What I see is it looks like the touch layer takes about 400 milliwatts. That's a half a watt. That's quite significant when a device can idle down to just 2 watts. So that's an extra 20% on top already. When you're pushing the brightness up as well, there's a big difference in the power needed to push the brightness up to high levels, 1.5 watts. The details were in that video. So overall, the background drain on these is significantly different. Now that will translate to significantly different usage times in certain scenarios. As you use a higher level of performance, for example gaming, you won't notice that difference so much. Differential in percentage won't be so great. But as you do things like basic browsing, the differential could be 20 to 30%. I did idle runtime tests on these two. The Full HD version idles down to under 2 watts with the screen on. That's with the screen on. We're in power saver mode, we haven't got the Wi-Fi on, and it's quite a theoretical test, but it worked for 30 hours. I actually measured it over a period of 17 hours and then extrapolated it. I also had a look at the performance monitor, which was running at 1.9, around 1.9 watts, and if you work that out on a 56 or 58 watt, I forget what it is now, 56 watt hour battery, you'll see that's around 30 hours as well. Now the Quad HD version doesn't get half of that. So what that means is when you're doing browsing, basic browsing, for example working in WordPress backend, I did a test over 5 minutes was averaging about 3.5 watts on the FHD version and over 5 watts on the Quad HD version. So that's a big percentage difference, and it means the difference between over 10 hours and well under 10 hours. So maybe 10 hours for the FHD version and 7 hours for the QHD version. Now I don't know whether there's a new BIOS update that might be fixing a problem on the QHD screen. It's possible. It's possible that the QHD screen needs another driver, needs another tweak to get it to really bring down its power level. But my feeling is that the touchscreen would take another 400 milliwatts in terms of power when it's active. There's a couple of apps that run in the background. When you've got a touchscreen, for example, the on-screen keyboard, that's always running and monitoring. That's going to take up a few CPU cycles. Not significant, but all these things add up. And then when we go back to that PPI density, pushing the light through those very dense pixels is going to be harder on the QHD screen. It'll take more power than on the full HD screen. So there's a roundup, QHD versus FHD devices. I'm a touch user and I know which one I prefer, and it's not the touch version here. And in fact, this FHD version is personally one of the nicest laptops I've ever tested in the last 10 years. It is a fantastic bit of engineering. Now, if you need touch, there's nothing wrong with this version. If you don't need 10, 12 hours battery life, then why is this a problem? If you can afford 1,399 euros, if you can justify that, there's really nothing wrong with the QHD version at all. The colors and the sharpness of the screen is incredible, and it looks beautiful. That the glossy screen, if you've got the right background, really brings you some fantastically sharp video images. And I can't say that it's a bad laptop at all. It's just that if you're mobile and these devices are aimed at a very mobile scenario, then probably the FHD version is the better choice. That's my personal opinion. What you need to do now is go and look at the 2 full reviews for the XPS 13 FHD and the XPS 13 QHD on our website, and take a look at the pros and cons, the breakdown of the scores, and you'll find more information on heat as well, which might be slightly different. I haven't looked before doing this video, based on the fact that the Quad HD version takes more power. That's a really long and detailed look at the QHD versus FHD Dell XPS 13s, but these are very significantly important devices for 2015 and 2016, and I hope that helps you. I've had a lot of experience with these devices now, so if you put comments in the YouTube video below, I'll try and answer them as best I can. If you spotted a mistake in my methodology, and go back to that section on power earlier in this video to see and hear about some of my techniques and methodology there, then please flag it up. I'm happy to, within the next few days before these go back, before Christmas, to have another look at those tests. But at the moment, I've done everything I can to make these exactly the same, and those are the results we've got. Thanks to Dell for letting us test these, and thanks for watching. If you get something out of this video, give us a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel where we're putting up reviews, mini reviews of our devices we're testing in the lab. Where the full reviews are on the website, you'll get a summary review on this channel. My name's Chippy, thanks for watching, we'll see you on the next video.